Good morning, Council. Mr. ALMEDA. We're ready to proceed with sentencing. I believe I received everything you submitted and read everything up until the documents that just came in this morning. As I indicated, at least in one electronic communication to you, my preference for beginning the sentencing hearing is to proceed with testimony, starting with Dr. Zelig today. And depending on how long that takes, and I had no estimate of that and did not know how many witnesses the state might have, we can then talk about scheduling the rest of the time and how much time to allot to the other oral presentations that we may have. One question to you, Mr. Lambert, are you in that murder trial that we last talked about? Or did that get postponed, or?
We settled it the day we were supposed to begin trial.
Okay.
So no, I am not in that trial. I do not have to leave. I have all the time we need.
Okay. Okay. If we're ready to begin with testimony, we can start the sentencing proceeding in that manner, unless there are some preliminary questions or issues to take up. Mr. Myofis?
The state's ready for Dr. Zelig.
And Dr. Zalig's the only witness I'm going to call.
Okay.
So I don't know if the state's going to call any witnesses or not.
I didn't know. Let's start with Dr. Zelig, and I presumed he was going to take some time, so.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably more than Mr. Myofis.
I didn't see him. Is he here?
Yeah, he's in the back. Come on over.
Ah, there he is.
Solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in the cause before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, Doctor. Please be seated. And please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
My name is Mark, conventional spelling, last name Zelig. Z as in zebra, E is in echo, L as in Lima, I as in India, and G as in George.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Zalig, how did you become involved in this case?
I was contacted by your office last year, at which time I learned that you had this case and you were interested in retaining me for the purposes of doing a psychological evaluation on your client.
What was your understanding of what we wanted to have you do as far as the psychological evaluation?
It was my understanding that you wanted to see if I could obtain an opinion as to your client's possible motivations for his actions in this case, that is for killing Bree. And the second part of the opinion you asked for was a analysis of risk.
And in your analysis of risk, does that also cover the area of rehabilitation and treatment?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Have you provided expert testimony before?
Yes, I have.
And in what courts have you done so?
I have testified many times in this jurisdiction. I've testified in federal courts, multiple state jurisdictions in the lower 48, military settings.
What states have you testified in?
Besides Alaska, it'd be Utah, Nevada, Missouri, Idaho.
Wyoming?
Yes, Wyoming.
And what federal circuits have you testified in?
I've testified in the circuit that's in Anchorage, the one in Southern Nevada, the one that's located in Salt Lake City.
Mostly the Ninth Circuit? That'd be the Ninth Circuit.
It'd be the 9th and 10th.
Okay. Have you ever been retained by my firm prior to this case?
No, I've just opposed your firm before.
You were against me in a child custody case that I was
That's
doing?
correct.
Okay, that David Shoup represented.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, what I do is I'd like to go a little bit through your educational background and your police career. So, can you give us a history of your educational and professional background?
Sure. I obtained a bachelor's of science degree in police science and psychology from Brigham Young University. I then joined the Salt Lake City Police Department, and early in my career, I was desirous of going higher in the department, so I went back to school, and I eventually got a master's in school psychology, and by that time I decided I liked psychology, and I went and got a doctorate at the University of Alabama.
Okay.
So that's just leading up to the PhD.
Okay, and then you got a PhD from where?
University of Alabama,
In what?
psychology.
All right, and after you graduated, did you continue to work, after you got your PhD, did you continue to work for the Salt Lake City Police Department?
Well, actually, after I finished my classwork, I went back because I still really liked police work. That was still my first love, so I stayed on the police department even though I was pursuing my PhD.
Did they give you time off to pursue your degrees?
Yes, they did.
Okay, and then after you got your schoolwork done, you went back and worked for the department?
Yes, I actually ended up retiring from that agency.
Before you went to school for your degrees, did you go to a police academy?
Yes, I did.
And describe what you did as far as becoming a police officer.
Well, it was a typical police academy that involves academics, physical tactics, firearms. It's much like the academy that's in Alaska and many other states. And yes, I had to do that to become certified as a peace officer.
And how long were you a peace officer for?
A little bit over 25 years.
Why don't you tell us a little bit, I guess before we talk a little bit more about what you did as a police officer, why don't you tell the court what school psychology is?
Well, school psychology is a branch of psychology that is focused on trying to help students understand learning problems, issues with school adjustment. It addresses things like academic testing, picking out people's strengths and weaknesses in the academic areas.
After you got your PhD, did you have to do an internship anywhere?
Well, I actually had to do my internship before I got my PhD, and I did a full-time internship at the Veterans Administration Hospital, and it was mainly in neuropsychology.
And tell us what neuropsychology involves.
Neuropsychology is the application of study to brain behavior relationships. Has a lot to do with understanding how the brain works as manifested in behavior.
And roughly how many hours of work did you do under supervision, just in your internship alone?
Just in the internship, it was 2,000.
All right, now you indicated you were in the police department for 25 years. Why don't you tell us sort of the history of what you did for the police department over time?
Well, like many other officers, I started off in a patrol division, answering calls. That was my main function. There wasn't very much traffic enforcement. It was mainly responding to criminal types of calls.
How long did you do that? How long were you a patrol officer for?
Oh, for probably about 8 or 9 years before I got promoted to being a sergeant.
Okay. What moved you up to a sergeant?
Once I became a sergeant, I had a squad in one of the patrol divisions that I would supervise, and I'd make sure they came to work, they were ready to go to work. I'd be called out to assist them on calls where there need to be supervision.
What type of calls?
All the sorts of calls the police department could receive, from everything from an injured animal, to child abuse, to homicides, to robberies.
Okay, the gamut of it.
Yep.
Okay. And then from sergeant, how long were you a sergeant for?
Approximately 5 years.
And then after that?
I was promoted to lieutenant.
And were you a lieutenant for the remainder of your career?
I was.
And what did you do as a lieutenant?
Well, instead of supervising a squad, I was a watch commander. I supervised the whole city in terms of field calls, and I would go to all major crimes frequently. I was required unless I was tied up to go to all the death calls.
Were you actually a homicide detective ever?
No, I was not actually assigned the job of being a follow-up detective, but I was responsible for supervising the initial scenes. And after I got my doctorate, I consulted with detectives when they thought there were psychological components in homicides, such as so-called profiling, things of that nature that involve psychological expertise applied to homicide scenes.
Can you tell us some of maybe the high points of your career in law enforcement?
Well, one of the high points that was quite rewarding to me is there was a period of time in which I was an assistant division commander, and it was back in the later 80s, and there was a lot of increased interest in domestic violence issues. And I was named as Salt Lake County started a domestic violence council, and I was the police department representative to that. So I interfaced between the police department and that appointed government agency.
How long did you do that for?
For a couple of years.
Okay. What are the high points?
Well, one of the really rewarding parts is after that got off the ground, it caught some national attention. I eventually gave congressional testimony on domestic violence issues. I was subsequently appointed by then Attorney General Janet Reno to be on a committee to assist in police recruitment and selection across the country, and I travel a lot, going to so-called model agencies and trying to identify best practices. So a lot stemmed from that initial involvement in domestic violence. I saw a lot of changes take place in how police and society shifted from pretty much ignoring it, blaming the woman, to looking at ways in which we could give each participant assign appropriate responsibility for their involvement in domestic violence.
Did you also do psychological profiling in homicide and sex cases?
Yes, I did.
Describe that to the court.
Well, what I might be asked to do, and I also worked on stalking cases, is when there were crimes in which the detectives or field officers thought there were obvious psychological overtones, which usually meant that there was some weird things that happened at the crime scene that didn't make sense in terms of that went beyond someone's need just to commit the crime. I was asked to generate some hypotheses as to who might be responsible or who we could rule out, things of that nature.
Did you, in doing the profiling, did you have experience in profiling suspects, defendants, after you met them, or both?
Both. And that was especially so after I retired, and I might be retained by an attorney, especially like in capital homicides, where the intent and motivation of the person was really important in terms of trying to fashion an appropriate sentence. Because by then a science had developed that allowed us to look at crime scenes and have a pretty good idea of whether this person was close or attached to the victim versus someone who was just a pure perpetrator. So my involvement's continued in this sort of activity to this day.
In addition to the professional training that you had, did you have any, I guess what I'm getting at, in addition to the education that you had, have you had any other professional training beyond receiving your PhD over the years?
Oh yeah.
Can you outline that for us?
In the 90s, I decided that I had this goal my whole life of becoming a board-certified forensic psychologist because there were so few of them. And I began a 5-year course of study, and this is after being licensed and having my doctorate. And in 1998, I had submitted work samples to a board and then completed an oral examination and became a board-certified forensic psychologist.
Have you published any articles, delivered presentations at professional meetings, or presented CLE workshops in the areas that we've been discussing?
Yes, I have. I have been teaching the application of psychology and homicide since 2000 to professional groups. I just recently taught a day-long workshop in New Orleans. And
What type of, what areas have you been teaching over the years involving what you have your degrees in?
well, the main areas that I give instruction in, I give the homicide workshops, like I mentioned. I also give workshop or CLE to other, to attorneys, judges, physicians in stalking and threat assessment.
Do you do those both for the government agencies as well as defense agencies or defense attorneys?
I actually do them for professional associations, and they do the enrollment. But yes, people from both sides appear at those regularly.
What do you mean by professional associations?
Well, like the American Psychological Association is one that sponsored a lot of my workshop. So has the American Board of Professional Psychology. I'm also board certified in police and public safety psychology, and they recently sponsored a workshop addressing the content I've just described.
Okay, I'm going to ask you in a second about board certification. Have you published any articles?
Yeah.
In what areas?
Well, the great majority of the articles and professional presentations I've given have been in forensic and police psychology.
How many articles roughly have you published?
Well, if I include the workshop materials, the articles, the invited presentations, it's over 125.
Okay. Now you indicated that you have board certification. Tell us what you have to do to get board certification.
Well, to get board certification, after you make your initial application, the first thing that the board wants to look at are representative work samples, and it may be video recordings of you interacting in clinical situations, or it may be written work samples. And they want to look at the work samples before they even invite you to come take the examination to determine if you are functioning at an advanced level of competence.
And when they do this, do you have to do this procedure for each area you want to be board certified in?
Yes, I do.
And what areas are you board certified in?
I'm board certified in clinical psychology
Since when?
since about 1997.
Okay. What else?
Forensic psychology, 1998.
Okay.
And police and public safety psychology was in 2014. The reason that one's so late is they didn't even have the board certification until a few years ago.
Okay.
So,
Is there a difference between being board certified and being a diplomat?
No, those terms are used interchangeably in professional psychology.
Okay.
But there are differences between board certifications. I mean, quite frankly, sometimes 2 cereal box tops and $20 to what we call vanity boards will get you a so-called board certification.
Where are your board certifications from?
Mine are from the American Board of Professional Psychology. It's a board that you really had to submit the work samples. It's a board where people fail the exams. It's not a vanity board. And as a matter of fact, in the world, there's less than 300 board certified forensic psychologists.
That's what I was going to ask you. Roughly how many licensed psychologists are there in the United States?
Oh, I have that written down. It's
Does the 93,000 sound familiar?
that's familiar, 93, 95,000.
Do you know how many approximately psychologists there are that have that board certification in clinical psychology?
There are approximately 1,300, 1,500, so you just have to do the math there to realize that with clinical psychology, which is the most commonly awarded board certification, you have about 2%. 1 out of 50 psychologists have that.
And how about how many psychologists in the country or around the world have board certification in forensic psychology?
Approximately 300.
And about how many psychologists in the world have board certification in police and public safety psychology?
About 70.
Do you know if there are any in the state of Alaska?
There is, unless something happened in the last week or two, there are no board certified forensic or police psychologists who have an address in Alaska, except myself.
Then what about when you hear people that say they're forensic psychologists but they don't have board certification? What does that mean?
I hear that all the time, and it means that the person is a licensed psychologist who's chosen to practice, to have a large forensic practice. And that doesn't mean they're bad psychologists. Some of them are very good forensic psychologists. But there isn't the type of quality control or peer examination process that I've just described that only a board certified psychologist can claim.
Have you ever been an examiner for the American Board of Forensic Psychology and the Board of Police and Public Safety Psychology?
Yes, I've served for both boards and examining other candidates who are seeking board certification.
And are you a fellow in any other organization?
Yes, usually once you become
What is a fellow, first of all?
a fellow, is very equivalent to what I've already described. It's someone who's being recognized by their peers, is having an advanced level of competence in the area in which they have fellowship.
Okay. And was that what you were discussing when you were talking about the American Board of Forensic Psychology?
I was really, when I talked about American Board of I'm getting a little bit twisted with the fellowship word. It's basically equivalent. Anyone who's a fellow of the American Board of Forensic Psychology is also board certified.
Are you also a fellow of the American Academy of Clinical Psychology?
Yes, I am.
What states do you hold licenses in to practice as a psychologist?
Alaska, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, Wyoming. There's 6 altogether. Did I get this?
Is Hawaii?
Hawaii also, yes.
Are you involved in any professional organizations over the last 20 years?
Yes.
Can you kind of give us not all of them, but a highlight of most of them?
Well, I've been a member of the American Psychological Association since I went to graduate school. I'm a member of the Alaska Psychological Association, the Utah Psychological Association, the International Homicide Investigators Association. I'm also a member of the Police Psychology section within the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And there are a lot more, but
How about the International Neuropsychology Society
yes, I'm a member of that.
and the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals?
Yes.
What's that involved?
That's a group of it's a multidisciplinary group. We have regular meetings. I usually meet in the Los Angeles area where we discuss different threat scenarios that are cropping up both in the public and private sector. I got involved in that because I mentioned earlier that I was quite active in looking at stalking cases, and I'm sure it's not surprising that those who do threat assessments often are involved with stalkers. And
Does a lot of your stalking that you've done involve celebrities?
yes, some of it has.
And in any of the organizations that we've been discussing, and your CV is filled with many other things we're not discussing, but
I appreciate that, thank you.
over all the years that you've been doing this, have you ever held any offices in any of these organizations?
Yes, I was president of the police psychology section within the American Psychological Association. I was the co-chair of the ethics committee in police psychology for the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I've served on a group of psychologists that were involved with providing general counsel to the American Psychological Association. I mentioned before that Attorney General Janet Reno appointed me to a committee in which I worked within the Clinton administration on improving police selection and best practices. So
What is a governance position?
it's it's like being the chair, the president of the local bar association.
And have you had any of those positions?
Yes.
With who?
Well, that's what I was referring to before. When I was the president of the police psychology section, I was elected to that. I've also served in such a position within the American Psychological Association when it came to continuing education for psychologists.
Any other ones that stand out that are noteworthy you think that we should inform the court of?
No. I mean, I've been before this court before, and that's why I'm comfortable abbreviating, not going through every single thing.
Okay. You've been in front of Judge Volan on
Yes,
several
I have.
occasions, and you've also been examined by Mr. Myomis in the past also.
Yeah, that's correct.
What I'd like to do now is I'd like to kind of switch a little bit, and can you tell us what the definition of forensic psychology is and what a forensic psychologist does?
Well, forensic psychology is the application of psychology to psycholegal issues, which means that sometimes in police departments or courts, there are relevant issues that come up that can be informed by an expert that can inform the court about what psychological science says about a certain topic. So anytime you apply science to a courtroom, you have a forensic science. And this is the branch of psychology that addresses relevant issues of scientific nature in a court.
Does it involve risk assessment and prospects for rehabilitation?
Yes, it does.
Do forensic psychologists have a set of guidelines for their practice?
Yes, we not only have the ethical guidelines that are published by the American Psychological Association, but there are practice guidelines published or which are authored by the American Board of Forensic Psychology.
So tell us, not when we're talking about the ethics standards, because I'm assuming that's similar to lawyers that have ethics standards that you just have to follow. So let's talk a little bit about practice guidelines. When you do a forensic evaluation, is there a standard way of doing one? Or does everybody just kind of make it up as they go?
Well, everyone I've evaluated is an individual, and I can't recall the time. The only time I do exactly the same thing is when I'm screening police or public safety applicants. They get the same battery. But in terms of cases that come before a court, I have a general procedure which I always follow in terms of informed consent and what the ground rules are for the evaluation, but the exact type of assessments I do sometimes varies depending on the issue before the court.
Let's talk about briefly the informed consent and sort of the ground rules that you use in each one. Tell us what those are.
Well, without going through the whole document, the main message that I give the retaining attorney and the person with whom he or she wants me to evaluate is I let them know that I will do my best to do an impartial evaluation. It may work out, you may like the results, you may think it's going to be helpful, but that's not always the case.
So whenever you do an evaluation, do you always end up testifying favorably for somebody in a courtroom?
Well, no, and oftentimes, not often, but maybe 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 times, the attorney will say, well, I appreciate your work, thank you very much, and they don't even ask me to write a report because I've told them what the report will say, and they've concluded that's not going to help their client.
Okay, so the informed consent and the sort of guidelines that you do, continue on and explain those to us if there's more to it.
Well, there is. I believe that I'm one of the few psychologists in this jurisdiction who electronically records my evaluations. I want to be transparent. I want to have a record that the other side can look at and critique if they desire, or to get a second opinion, hire their own experts. And that was done in this case.
And when you say electronically recorded, are you talking about you recorded the interview with Josh?
Yes, and the one that I did with his mother, any of those interactions, they're sound recorded, and most of the time they're video recorded.
And though that information was provided to Mr. Myotis,
That's right.
you sent it to me through Dropbox and I forwarded it on to Mr.
That's
Myotis.
correct.
Okay. Then after you've done those type of things, when you do a forensic evaluation, I'm kind of hearing you say that each individual is sort of done a little differently.
That's correct.
And why is that? And how do you determine what you do with each individual?
Well, in most occasions, before I even sit down with a client, I have gone through as much of the discovery or so-called evidence as I'm able to. And as I go through those materials, which were rather voluminous in this case, I start developing questions in my mind. I want to answer certain questions, and I see certain issues emerge. So that's the reason why you'd be hard-pressed if you pulled in all the cases I've done in this jurisdiction to find 2 of them that were done exactly the same.
So if I understand what you're saying is the evaluation that you do, once sort of the informed consent and the ground rules are set out, the evaluation is dependent upon what you're reading in your materials and what you're looking for and what the attorney's asking you to do.
Right, and one of the reasons for that is one of the first things a brand new forensic psychologist learns is that when you speak to a subject, a defendant, a witness, some of them don't tell the truth and they know they're lying to you. Other people believe they're telling you the truth, but they're not being accurate. And for this reason, there's a heavy emphasis on looking at collateral material, looking at police reports, photographs, interviewing third parties as necessary.
So it's essentially a mini investigation.
That's right.
And then do you do psychological testing along with that?
Yes, that's another assessment technique that is used that goes beyond just listening to what the subject is telling you.
So if I understand what you're saying, when you talk to someone like Josh,
Right.
if I hear you correctly and tell me if I'm wrong, 3 things can come out of the conversation with him. 1, he's lying about what happened. 2, he's telling you the truth about what happened. Or 3, he believes that a certain event occurred a certain way, and he may be mistaken, but is truthfully relating it to you the way he believes it to be.
Plus, a fourth possibility is a combination of the previous three.
Explain that.
Well, certainly people can tell you the truth and give you self-serving statements and lie about other things. I've also had people admit to me that they've done things that they thought were wrong, and they were wrong in believing they did it.
Let's say that you're talking to somebody and they've been highly intoxicated. They're drunk. I mean, they're just drunk. And they're involved in a traumatic event. And they're the perpetrator of the traumatic event. Can that still, those combinations affect their memory?
Each of those factors impacts memory.
How does it impact memory singly and in combination with one another?
Well, it interrupts something that we generally call consolidation. In other words, when I just listen to your question, I have to remember what you asked, and then I have to put it in my brain and give a response. When I've been traumatized or when I've been drinking, that process is interrupted. So I may remember the question for a very short period of time and be unable to remember it 5 minutes later or 5 hours later. And I see this in all sorts of people. I see this in people who have psychological diagnoses. I see this occur. I work with police officers who have been involved in shootings and who are often surprised when the body cams are played back or they see objective evidence of what happened, about the discrepancy between what they believe they're sincerely reporting versus what actually happened.
So what you're saying is that officers that have body cams on believe that an event they were involved in happened a certain way, and the body cam shows that their memory, due to sometimes the traumatic nature of the events or how quickly the event occurs, they don't remember everything or don't remember it correctly.
I have men and women come in who don't even remember the shots being fired. They would say they're firing their gun, but they didn't hear the sound. Call it auditory blocking. It's been well documented. And the reason I'm referring to police is that this is one area where there's just been a lot of research that's applicable to a whole lot of cases about how people remember traumatic things, because we have an ability to verify. We can tell how many shots were fired. You know, we can reconstruct a lot of things and establish ground truth, and that's how we know that under traumatic situations, people are sometimes not very reliable historians, especially when it comes to time perception and things like that.
Now, I want to ask you, what was the procedure that you used in Joshua's case for doing his evaluation?
Well, it started out like many of the others. Before I met with him, I wanted to be prepared for the interview. And I reviewed a considerable amount of discovery material. If my memory serves me, it was all the police reports that your office provided. I read in the grand jury.
Go ahead.
I looked at the grand jury exhibits. So there was a lot of material that I reviewed before I even sat down with him.
So let's talk about that for a minute. Did you create a document called Document Review that's dated January 31st, 2016?
Yes, I did. I submitted 3 reports. One of them is called the Document Review. And the reason that might be useful at this point is just the first 3 pages has a table of contents. And the table of contents is a listing of all the materials that I reviewed.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked Defendant Exhibit 1. Do you have a copy of that in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Okay, let's just refer to yours.
Same thing.
Is this a copy of
Yes,
your
it
document
is.
review?
Okay.
Can you just briefly go through it and tell us what documents you reviewed?
Okay, I read a letter from Judge Spann regarding witness immunity of Ms. ALMEDA. I read the pre-sentence report. And when I say that, the main area that I read was the agent's report. I did not read all the victim or all the witness statements that were appended to it.
Why not?
For one reason, both sides submitted quite a few, and a lot of the people are writing about things that are really, really important to them, and which are really important to a lot of us, but it doesn't necessarily answer the forensic question that you asked me to answer regarding risk and the motivation. So,
Was there anything else about why you didn't read them all?
well, I was a little bit, when I was contacted in the case, I did a Google search just to see what was out there in the media. And I saw a Facebook page that appeared to be soliciting letters of support. And
Go ahead, continue on.
anyway, I was aware that there were many people who really missed Bree, and I did gain an appreciation of how many people's lives she touched, and what a loss not only to her family, but our community her death was. But again, these don't ordinarily give me information that helps me answer those forensic or psycholegal questions.
Are you referring to a letter that was posted on Facebook asking people to take this letter and either use it or modify it and provide it to the judge whether they knew Bree or not, or were a stranger?
Yes, in fact, I brought that to your attention when I did my Google search.
Okay. Okay, so what other things did you look at?
Okay, I looked at the APD's crime scene diagram. I looked at the various reports. I reviewed approximately 1,000 photographs that were taken at the scene and at autopsy. I looked at previous contacts that your client has had with APD, in other words, his previous arrests. I looked at some of the laboratory studies that were done at the Alaska Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory. I read the medical examiner's report. I read a report regarding a stolen weapon that was taken by the state troopers back in 2010. I looked at various search warrant affidavits submitted by the case manager in the case. So,
Did I essentially give you all the discovery in the case, but for one thing that Mr. Myovis provided yesterday, which were some text messages that had to be taken off a hard drive that Mr. Myovis downloaded and provided to you yesterday?
that is correct.
Did you review those last night?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so essentially, is it your understanding that you received all of the discovery that I had received in this case?
That's my understanding.
Did you also receive transcripts of a trial that Mr. Almeida had been involved in, involving a Kimber Dubé?
No.
I believe there was a trial. I think there were transcripts in there. Did you receive a lot of transcripts of interviews of the females that had been interviewed by the police?
I recall reading the summaries of those
Okay.
in the APD reports, but I don't recall actually seeing the transcripts.
I'm pretty sure we sent you the transcripts, but regardless, you read a lot of information and had a lot of information about this case?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. You have any objections? Judge, I move for admission of Exhibit 1.
No objection, Your Honor.
One will be admitted.
As a result of your review of all these documents, did you also create a timeline and character list that was dated February 2nd, 2016?
Yes, I did, because there were so many events that were relevant to this testimony today. I just made a simple chronology. It helped me keep the dates and times straight. I hope that it assists the court in doing that also, so.
I move for admission of Exhibit 2.
No objection, Your Honor.
2 will be admitted. Is that the document review and then timeline?
Yes, it
and
is,
that
Judge.
order?
Yes. I believe those were already filed with you.
They were.
But- Okay, so let's talk about Josh. Besides the extensive document review you did and creating the timeline and character line, tell us how you went about just generically doing the evaluation from beginning to end, then we're gonna break it down and talk about various segments of it, okay?
Okay, and,
Maybe it's easier to ask it this way. Was it important to obtain relevant and personal and family history from Mr. Almeida?
yes,
Why is it important to do so?
because if a psychological or psychiatric diagnosis is relevant, family history becomes relevant because we know that there's some diseases and disorders that usually don't occur without a family history.
Did you get information regarding Mr. Almeida's early life history?
Yes, I did.
And describe for us what you mean by early life history and what information you received.
Well, I spoke to your client at the jail, and I also spoke to his mother. I interviewed Miss Almeida, and on top of that, there were some references to early life experience in various medical records, treatment records, such as he was seen at Providence briefly, and there was a short family and social history contained in that record.
Was there anything about his early life history that jumped out as being significant?
Actually, what jumps out as being significant is that it wasn't. It was fairly uneventful. I mean, it appears to me that he was raised in a really good and supportive family that provided well for him and provided a lot of good experiences. Appears that he had 2 good parents. So that in a way, the absence of issues jumped out at me.
Okay. And then did you discuss his educational history?
Yes, I did. He was educated here in Anchorage because even though he wasn't born in Alaska, he moved here by the time he was about 3. And I learned that he went to Service High School. He was active in athletics. He briefly went to the University of Alaska at Anchorage before he decided he wanted to stop and just focus on his occupational pursuits.
Did anything jump out at you from going and getting a review of his educational history?
No.
Did you get occupational history from him?
Yes, I did.
And what's the importance of an occupational history?
Well, it becomes eventually forensically relevant because we know that people who have poor occupational adjustment have an added risk factor if they're ever placed under community supervision, and by the same token, those who have a history of good occupational adjustment have a protective factor if they're ever given the privilege of community supervision.
And what did you find from Josh's occupational history?
It was actually pretty solid. He indicated that he was fired on one occasion, but it wasn't because he was disliked, it's because they found out he had a DUI and he had a job where he had to drive vehicles. I found that he was a pretty hard-working person who wanted to make as much money as he could working. It also seemed that he liked jobs where he could work by himself, be sort of socially isolated. For example, there was a period of time where he had a job at Costco on the front line, and he told me that from day one he didn't like that job. Mm-hmm. And he started looking for another one almost immediately.
What was he doing? What was your understanding of what Josh did for a living at the time he was arrested?
He worked at a muffler shop installing packs, doing automobile maintenance, that's my understanding.
He was in the automotive industry,
That is correct.
and had he been in the automotive industry for several years?
He had been.
And did he indicate that that was something that interested him and he liked doing quite a bit?
Yeah, it seems like he really liked the mechanics, and he also liked the ability to be able to work on a car rather than work with people.
Okay. And this was one of the things that said that was a positive protective risk factor that you mentioned further in your report, which we'll discuss later. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you obtain a military history from him?
I don't believe he has a military history, so I didn't.
And did you go through his criminal history and other life events with him?
Yes, I did, and for simplicity purposes, I just put those on the chronology rather than listing them in the report.
Those are in the timeline.
That's correct.
Okay, and those are accurately, you believe, set forth in the timeline?
That is correct.
Okay. Then did you want to get a family history for psychopathology?
I did.
And what do you mean when you say psychopathology?
Any type of psychiatric or psychological disturbance, we know that they, like everything else, it tends to run in families. And the minute you're born, you can be at greater risk for some diseases or disorders than other people.
Tell us what it is that you found regarding his family history of psychopathology.
Well, on the father's side, it was fairly unremarkable. Neither Josh or his mother knew of any significant psychopathology on the paternal side. But on his mother's side, Josh's maternal grandfather had issues with substance abuse and stability in his behavior. His mother also told me that she has some issues, but it sounded to me like many of those were secondary to her exposure, to her involvement in Bree's death. And
She indicated she suffered from depression and PTSD and anxiety as a result of the incident that happened in her residence.
yes,
Okay. Was there anything other than the maternal grandfather using various substances that jumped out regarding the family history of psychopathology?
no, I asked both Josh and his mother, and I again corroborated this when I did find some healthcare records, and all sources were pretty consistent. There weren't suicides, there wasn't any evidence of learning disabilities, and or any type of serious psychopathology. The one thing we know for sure, according to both Josh and his mother, is the maternal grandfather had some serious substance issues, and perhaps died prematurely because of those.
Is there a genetic link between substance abuse? And,
There's a genetic risk.
well, is there a hereditary, I guess, link that it just goes from one generation to another that makes it more likely someone who's had a previous bout in the family with alcoholism or substance abuse is likely to have it in the future?
Right, if you have some
family.
relatives who have been challenged or have had substance abuse problems, the likelihood of other relatives having a similar problem is elevated, even if they're not raised with each other, even if they're completely raised apart. So, yeah, this is why wise people said choose your parents carefully, because you do get a mixed bag of positive and negative traits.
Other than the maternal grandfather, there was nothing else that jumped out regarding history, hereditary or otherwise, of substance abuse, alcoholism in Joshua's family.
That's correct.
Okay. You also asked, you also had a section in your report called Joshua's Perspective on His Relationship with Brianna. Why do you think that was important to get that?
Well, this goes back to our initial conversation in which you wanted to better understand why this happened. And of course, the relationship is very relevant to that. So
what jumped out at you about that?
There were several things. First of all, in learning more about Bree, she struck me as being a very kind, very giving person, a very tolerant person, perhaps sometimes to a fault. And I mean, we can even look at the courtroom and see the type of support that's here on her behalf today to corroborate that. I thought he was really lucky to find her and to be able to become intimate. So that was one impression, is I had a very high opinion of her. The other thing is that I was aware of his history of stormy relationships. APD had done a really good job in contacting past intimates, and we knew that relationships were difficult for Josh, that he appeared to react very strongly, that it was very difficult for him to deal with separation or perceived abandonment. And one thing I noticed about this relationship is that those aspects of his personality appeared to probably have improved, that he was doing better with trust.
Explain that a little further.
Well, when we look at his history of previous relationships, and I've outlined those in the timeline again, Josh did not deal well with separation or some perceived breakup.
Let me ask you this while you're talking about that. Did that lead you to some sort of suspicion that there may be some sort of personality disorder in play?
Yes, and one of the real telling symptoms of that is Josh told me that he's never been alone since he was in high school. And people who can't tolerate to be alone for a day or so, you know, I'm perhaps being a little bit facetious, but his intolerance of being by himself was a big red flag.
Okay.
And it often signifies something I'll probably talk about more about, something we call borderline personality.
Right, we're going to talk about that, but I want you to continue on with what you were describing.
So, in any event, when I would review text messages and records, certainly there were times in which Josh might get angry, might be a bit moody, but I didn't see him threatening, especially himself. That was his typical type of response with an imminent separation, is that he might threaten to kill himself or harm himself in some other way. So I didn't see any of that sort of self-harm, self-injurious behaviors going on in this relationship.
So are you indicating in all of the discovery that was provided by Mr. Maiovis to you in this case, including the text messages from last night, you didn't see anything that indicated that Josh was being physically abusive? Is that what you're saying?
None at all. There were times in which he certainly appeared to be a jerk with her. I don't know a better clinical term for it. But I didn't see any evidence of him being physically abusive toward her or toward himself.
During their relationship you're talking
Right.
about? Okay. Is that what you were referring to when it indicated that Josh seemed to be getting better because this behavior
Yes.
wasn't going on?
Yeah, and in clinical psychology, there's this term called an emotional corrective relationship. Refers to the fortunate event might happen that if you have some challenges in life and you pair up with someone who's able to help you repair those. And I think in some ways, this was one of those emotionally corrective relationships.
Okay, continue on.
Despite those changes, it appeared to me that the problems with substance abuse continued. I mean, I think that's rather obvious. I mean, not only does he have a criminal track record, which it seemed to me that in all but one of his arrests, he was very intoxicated, but we can see that substances were still playing an issue within this relationship.
Is it fair to say that the crux of Josh's problem, and we'll talk a little bit about this more further on, is it fair to say that the crux of what you see of Josh's problems stem from alcohol?
Yes.
And if he can control his alcohol, he'll be in a much better place.
Well, by control, I mean as long as he can be abstinent.
Right.
Right.
He can't, right, as long as he
Yeah.
doesn't consume alcohol.
Right.
Okay. So continue on with what you see is important in this area.
Well, as it says on the top of page 6 of my report, he described himself as having a great relationship. They had a lot of common interests, a lot of outdoor common interests. They were engaged. They were planning to get a house together. It really seemed like this was a positive experience for Josh, that he had really found somebody of great value.
Based on all the information that you had been provided in this case and your experience, knowledge, and training, did you see the same type of behavior in Josh with Bree, that you saw in his other relationships with the other women that APD had interviewed?
No, I think not only did he find, first of all, he started dating her, and his capacity to date a good person like this suggests that there was some, just that he was attracted to her is a positive sign to begin with. But secondly, when I said I went through 900 pictures, a lot of those pictures are notes that Bree would write. It seemed as if they were very much in love with each other. They both valued this relationship greatly. It appeared that it was the most important relationship to each of them that they had. Josh, when I asked Josh, what was the worst part of your relationship with Bree? He didn't really blame her. He said, I had a drinking problem, which is sort of obvious, but I was glad to see that he could recognize the obvious there.
When someone recognizes, I mean, let me ask you this, when you're doing these forensic interviews, does everybody always have insight into their behavior?
Oh no, a lot of times they're absolutely clueless, and this was quite different because when you asked me to describe psychological testing, I'll be able to tell you how I have measured instruments that talked about how open your client was being with me about his shortcomings.
Did it appear that, at least from that statement that he made to you, separate even from the psychological testing, that he appeared to have some insight into his problem
Yes.
of substance abuse?
Particularly the substance abuse. I don't know if he has good insight even to this day. One of the first things you do in treatment with borderline personalities, well, I guess we're starting to discuss it, is they have to get insight for how that pattern affects their life and the lives of other people around them.
Right, and we're going to talk about that when we come to the borderline personality disorder, because is it fair to say that Josh has never had any treatment for borderline personality disorder?
No, when I went through the records, as a matter of fact, I was really disappointed to see that when he was referred to treatment, it was just mainly just to stop drinking. And no one seemed to recognize what I thought was an obvious what we call dual diagnosis issue, that you have to, that you also have to treat something going on in a person's personality before you really can expect to make headway with the substance abuse.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Let's continue on with this section here. Anything else that jumps out and important to you about this?
No, on page 6, I did listen to my recording again, and I reproduced the conversation that we had about the events immediately preceding Brianna's death, and that's in the report there.
Okay. Did Josh seem to, when you were talking to him about his relationship and the event that occurred, did he seem to blame anybody but himself?
No, he, as a matter of fact, said, and I have it in quotations, I take responsibility for actions, but I didn't murder my fiancée.
What did you take that to mean?
I understood that he was taking responsibility for his irresponsible and stupid behavior that night. But he is also saying I did not intend or want to kill my fiancée.
Okay. And then did you talk to him about how he felt about losing her?
Yes, I did. He, first of all, in talking to him, one barrier there that's a little bit hard is, and it's a little hard to appreciate because his affect, or what we call range of emotions, is rather flat or blunted. He doesn't show a lot of emotions, regardless of what you're talking about. And that's been noticed by other commentators also. So that was a little bit harder to tease out, because it wasn't like when I asked him about losing Bree that he started to break down and cry. He was just pretty flat.
So let me ask you this. I know this is going to come up in the diagnosis section, but you're discussing your flat affect now. Is there a psychological term for that?
Well, I believe that when we talk about diagnosis, we'll talk about dysthymia, which is long-standing, sort of mild to moderate depression. And people who have that tend to get pretty flat. They don't laugh a lot, they don't cry a lot, they're just pretty much flatlined in terms of their emotions. It doesn't mean that they don't have emotions, it just means that the mechanism in which they're expressed is rather constricted. And it's one of the visual signs when you're talking to people. If you see flat affect, it's one of the red flags for depression.
You know, when you see something like that, when someone has a flat affect in a situation such as this, most people expect, you know, they're going to be bursting out in tears and crying. And when they don't see them doing something like that, and they see a flat affect, and when they talk or just how they are in general in a courtroom, does that sometimes get misconstrued as a lack of remorse and a lack of empathy?
Yes, it does, and that's.
How do you distinguish between that?
Well, that's when history taking becomes important, because if I saw the same lack of affect in someone who wasn't depressed, or someone who could joke with me or be funny or be sad about something else, then I might wonder, how come they're not responding to this horrible thing that happened to him? That wasn't the case here. He was flat about everything. And I note even in one of the police reports, like 3 or 4 hours after he's been taken into custody, they say he's really flat.
And is that an indication, well, from you talking with Josh and everything you've seen in this case and based on your experience, knowledge, and training, are you seeing that Josh has the dysthymia, if I'm pronouncing it right, dysthymia, as opposed to he just doesn't give a shit?
I think this is dysthymia. He may think sometimes, to use your phraseology, that he doesn't give a shit, but he does. And that takes us full circle to the role that alcohol played. Alcohol may have been one mechanism where he could have some feelings, albeit he'd go to the other extreme and be overly emotional.
Is it difficult, do you think it's difficult sometimes when we're in these sort of settings and we're talking about someone like Josh and some of the issues that go on with Josh, that because we don't do that for a living, we've never dealt with these kind of people, we're looking at through the wrong lens?
I can't tell unless I get a history, unless I know, until I can rule out dysthymia. Because flat looks flat. He looks flat right now.
Does he always look flat from what you've seen of him?
Yes.
Now, is there anything else in that section that you thought was pertinent we needed to discuss?
No, I think that we've pretty much covered it, and I'm of course aware that the court has a copy of the report and can read the paragraphs that I'm not reciting.
Then you have Mrs. Almeida's perspective on Josh and Brianna's relationship. Why was that important to get?
Well, going back to the first thing that you learn in forensic psychology is you try to get a reasonable number of collateral informants, whether it's written or witnesses. And I was interested in her perspective about the relationship. And she said that they got along well.
Why were you interested in her perspective and not Mr. Almeida's perspective?
Well, it's apparent that it was my understanding that he was gone more. We can look from the text messages that she had a close relationship with both Bree and her son. And of course, one of the reasons that she was the obvious is I was curious about which she would tell me about the night that this happened. She was the only witness who was there.
Okay,
So to me, it seemed like an obvious person to speak to.
okay, so tell us about what's pertinent under this section.
Well, she again told me that she saw no conflict. I even challenged her a bit on that because I know great relationships have conflict. And
Was it your understanding that Bree often spent the night over at the ALMEDA residence?
yes, not only did she spend the night over there, but she would go to his workplace so she could be available to him during his breaks, and she'd be in the parking lot. So
Just prior to Bree's death also, was she talking with Mrs. Almeida about moving into the residence there?
that's my understanding.
Okay, go ahead and continue.
And she always wanted to be with him. She always went accompanied him to treatment. I mean, one of the victim impact letters I even remember glancing at was about it being described as she was babysitting him, that she's with him so much.
Is that consistent with someone with Josh's disorder, that he would look for that kind of person?
He would like to have a person glued to his hip. Yeah.
Okay. It's not a forcing the person to be glued to your hip though.
No, you need the person there because you get a lot of your identity and how you define yourself by who you're in a relationship with. And in that sense, you become pretty dependent, much more than most people, on their partners.
Okay. Go ahead.
Miss Almeida was very adamant that her son was a better person since he started dating Bree.
I mean, he stopped getting in trouble and he appeared to be changing?
Yes, she saw positive change in him.
Okay.
Associated with that relationship. And that included like becoming more involved with the family, striving to be more dependent. She told me that the co-workers were saying he was working better. She also said that she believed that her son was very, very invested in trying to please Bree. She was somewhat critical of her son's spending habits.
Is that one of the other, when we talk about borderline personality disorder, impulsive spending, is that one of the factors?
It could be.
Okay.
Yes, because impulsivity is one of the symptoms of borderline personality, so it sometimes can take the form of impulsive spending.
Okay.
But if you talk to Josh, it wasn't impulsive. He wanted to get her, wanted to be part of getting her this car and getting her a nice ring, an engagement ring. So there was a difference in perspective between mom and son about the necessity of these purchases.
Okay.
Now, mom also told me that she was highly suspicious that her son might have bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't actually a bad hypothesis because, for one thing, we know that there is significant overlap between people who have borderline personality disorder and people who are bipolar. And, you know, mom may actually be correct, but I just couldn't find evidence to support that diagnosis at this time.
So tell us what bipolar disorder is.
Well, bipolar disorder is a mood disorder. It reflects the inability to regulate mood, and it's remarkable for distinct periods of time in which the person is either highly irritable or euphoric. They switch from being depressed to either euphoric or irritable. Irritability is the most common thing they swing to. And during their period of irritability or euphoria, they're more talkative, they sleep less, they're more impulsive, they're more socially outgoing, but they're also more irritable and frustrated if anyone thwarts what they're doing.
Were you able to confirm a diagnosis of bipolar disorder?
No, because I knew the substance abuse was going on, and substance abuse can mimic. In fact, there really is no difference between someone who's up on meth and someone who's having a manic episode. You really can't tell unless you get a history and get some laboratory tests.
So substance abuse can mask behaviors that might be mistaken as a psychological disorder, and so you need to, am I correct in that?
No,
Okay.
they don't mask it, they mimic it.
They mimic it,
They
okay,
make it look the same.
okay.
So that's why I'm saying his mother may be correct, but, you know, we have to have the time to observe him when we know he's drug-free and doesn't have the other things going on. And then finally, I wasn't able to elicit a family history for bipolar disorder. And
What's the
this,
importance of that?
this is a highly genetic disease. So it's possible for someone to develop bipolar disorder without a family history, but it's very rare. And it's, so that was another reason why I wasn't convinced this was actually going on.
Okay. Then you have pertinent observations made by Ms. Almeida on the night of Brianna's death.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, when I opened the door to this topic, Ms. Almeida said, look, it's still very surreal. I'm still in a lot of pain over this. I could see the toll that it had taken on her. And I asked her for her theory about what happened. Do you want me to? I mean, her theory was that he was drinking, he wasn't aware the gun was loaded when he pulled the trigger. She never believed that he would hurt Bree on purpose. Based on observing them together, she would say they never fought, they were always happy. She looked at Brianna as being like a member of the family already.
Did Brianna appear to spend a lot of time with the family?
Yes.
And did Mr. and Mrs. Almeida appear to be very close to Bree?
Yes, and you know, and I don't want to sound insensitive, you know, I've talked about the huge loss. This is the Bree's family and our community, but this was a loss to the Almeida family also. They appeared to be very close to Bree.
Is it fair to say when a tragic event happens like this, it's not a one-way street? Families on both sides are torn for different reasons.
Yeah, this is just a tremendously sad, you know, this starts to, you know, I can't stay too objective sometimes. It even starts affecting my emotions when I see what a huge tragedy and loss to both sides of the family.
Okay. Continue on.
She told me that during the week preceding Bree's death, that her son, that she is very angry at herself, very guilty, that she wasn't aware of his drinking. He said that he had been more disrespectful toward her that week, which is certainly evidence when you look at their text messages.
Mm-hmm.
He was being a jerk to his mom too. When she would inquire about some pain pills that she lost track of, the pain pills that were prescribed to the dog.
It turned out Josh didn't take those though.
That Josh didn't take them, but you know, he was highly offended that he'd be accused of that, which again I think goes to his insight about, gee, why in the, he didn't get why she might suspect him,
Mm-hmm.
where I think would be obvious to the rest of the world. She went down, you know, after she was aware that there was a problem, she went downstairs. She said that she had to push Josh away as he was lunging toward the gun. He was saying something about, it should have been me. It was Miss Almeida's impression that her son was trying to kill himself. I think her impression was probably accurate. I think his mother saved his life that night, literally. And that's because she was so concerned, that's why she ran upstairs and hid the gun until the police arrived. He said, she told me that Josh was out of his mind, he was pleading with her to wake up.
Did you listen to the 911 call?
Oh yeah, and that was really, really hard.
Judge, can I ask you a question? Have you heard the 911 call? Okay.
Okay, so
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, that, you could hear the pain. I mean, I talked about Josh being flat most of the time. He wasn't being flat during that call.
Describe what you took away from the 911 call.
That he was absolutely in terror. That he was in a state of disbelief. It's a very compelling call. I don't think I can describe. I can't do justice to that call in my testimony.
Is it? It's not the. It doesn't appear to be the type of thing that, you know, I just beat the crap out of my fiance and shot her.
No, that was not. It was the farthest thing from that.
Okay, continue on.
She believed that after she secured the weapon, that her son was looking for something else to harm himself, and she told me that after the police had conducted their investigation, she found the knife down there, and you know, she's suspecting that he was looking for that.
Okay.
To do himself in. I don't think that she's being histrionic or exaggerating in any way. I mean, we know from the research, and I know I'll probably be talking more about this, that a scenario in which he just destroyed the person whom he was closest to, it's not implausible at all that his next priority would be to dispatch himself.
Why is that? Just tell us now.
I'm telling you now because I believe that he knew he did a terrible thing, that the person whom he'd been the closest to in his whole life had just been destroyed, and I don't think he wanted to live. That's my feeling about it.
You know, most people would look at Josh right now and say there should be tears streaming down his face. He's not remorseful. Is this consistent with, I can't pronounce it, dysthymia? Dysthymia?
Dysthymia, see, you're getting it, okay? Yeah, it's, he's gonna be flat through the rest of this hearing probably. He's gonna, you know, this is what treatment is for him to discover how he can get access to his emotions without having a bottle in his hand.
Okay.
And I think it would be wrong to interpret his face right now, or when you look at the video recording of my interview, to say he just doesn't care. I think he cares so much he can't even express it.
Okay. After you got this background from the family, did you then do a clinical interview?
Yes, and by a clinical interview, it means that I had an outline. It was a structured outline in which I have a set of directions, and I asked the person questions.
So let me ask this, Judge. I don't know at some point if you want to take a break.
I did, right here.
This is probably a good point.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to get through this background before we got to the more technical part of Dr. Zelig's report, and we've been at it an hour and a half, so let's take a break.
Can I ask one question while we're still on the record, Judge?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert has marked some exhibits and provided them to the court. I suspect that Dr. Zelig's report's all going to come in. One of the things I've been very good about is I haven't provided the report to anybody, including OVR at this point, so nobody else has seen it. Now that it's marked in, it's been provided as an exhibit, and we're talking about it in open court. Is there any objection to me providing it to the?
I don't think I've provided the report as an exhibit.
I don't know if he intends to or not, but we're going to be talking about it an awful lot.
I'm a little reluctant, Judge, because quite frankly, I just don't trust the family. I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't trust them not to take that report and make it public and do whatever they choose to do with it. That's my concern.
Right now, the report has been sealed. Before I make a decision further on that, let's see how much becomes public record through the testimony itself. It does contain some psychological testing and other material that would, you know, typically be sealed in private. We'll see how much we get into that. I respected the doctor's wishes that it be sealed, and it's been that way so far. Right now, it's just been, you know, history of the event and family history, which I've not been concerned about, but let's
No,
see where you go.
We're gonna talk about the clinical testing and what the clinical testing means. I mean, we have to.
Right.
I appreciate the court's ruling at this point, Judge. I'll bring it up depending on where we are in the future. I know it's gonna be something that they're gonna ask me about, that's why I wanted to bring it up with the court. To be quite clear with the court too, is that despite anything that Mr. Lambert feels about the prior dealings up until this point in this case, I can assure the court that if there's a restriction on its who's allowed to see it and its availability made by the court, the family would absolutely honor that, Judge.
I would certainly be asking for something like that.
Okay.
OVR would like to be heard possibly on this issue specifically, because I know Mr. Lambert did not want Mr. Mayogas to disclose any of it. We could have litigated it. OVR was concerned that litigation over that particular issue would have caused the potential push off the state, and we were trying to be protective of the state. But OVR's ability to have it, I think legally we have the right to have a copy. OVR does not provide any documentation it receives.
I guess I disagree with OVR's right to have a copy. OVR and the victim are not a party to the proceeding. It's the state that has a right to see it. The judge has a right to see it. Beyond that, nobody else does. In terms of their right, whether or not I decide it should be shared because it becomes public through the proceeding is a different issue. And that's what I'm saying is we'll see how much of it is discussed openly in court and therefore becomes public. But I don't agree that OVR has a right to have a copy of it.
I guess.
Nor does the victim's family have a right to have a copy of it. This is part of the sentencing proceeding, and only the parties have that right.
And I guess that just sort of dovetails into this also, Judge. The state filed a sentence, the OVR filed a sentencing memorandum. They're not a party.
I know.
And
Well, I haven't crossed that issue yet, and maybe I have to address it now. I will. I didn't read it. It's my view that OVR is not a party.
It's also attached
They don't
to the
have a
pre-sentence
right to
report.
argue sentencing to me in terms of the legal issues any more than they would have a right to appeal on behalf of the victim. I think the Cooper case addresses that quite clearly, and therefore I didn't read the brief. I looked at it enough to see if it was a legal brief. It was. It wasn't just a statement on behalf of the victim. I mean, Mr. Moore gave a very long, good written victim statement to me. That's what I expect the victims have a right to do at sentencing, is give that kind of statement either in writing or orally. But in terms of pleading, neither the victim nor OVR has that right. So I didn't read it.
It's also attached to the pre-sentence report as an addendum, along with the state sentencing memorandum as an addendum.
Okay, well, like I said, I didn't read it.
No, I'm saying I don't think it should travel with the PSR, so when we take
Okay.
that issue up, I think it needs to come out of the PSR.
Okay.
I've never actually seen OVR's or the state sentence memorandum become an addendum to a pre-sentence report.
Okay, well, we'll address that when we deal with the corrections to the pre-sentence report. As I said, all of those issues I was pushing aside till we get through
Sure.
the testimony, which clearly looks like it's going to take all day today, given the pace we're proceeding at. But let's take our break here.
We're not gonna break for lunch, I
One
assume, or are we
one statement
going?
for the record is that OVR is entitled to all discovery that the state gets and that the defendant gets from the state. And so, in that sense, we are entitled by statute to materials that would normally go to a victim, and we are precluded by statute from sharing those confidential documents with the victim. I just wanted to put that on the record, Your Honor.
Okay. As to lunch, I was planning on breaking at 12:30. We may,
I just wanted to, I didn't know if anybody would have that question, I didn't know what the court.
yeah, that was,
Okay.
so let's take 15 minutes here, stretch our legs, come back, and you can pick up where we left off, Mr. Lambert. Thank you.
Sure.